Drinking life from a fire hose, it seems sometimes. Sound familiar? This is life in the ASAP lane. If you're feeling anxious, stressed, addicted, pressured, you are not alone. In fact, there's a global epidemic of stress and anxiety. Many aren't able to cope without the use of pills, alcohol, food, even retail therapy, shopping. The result is record levels of opioid overdose deaths, obesity levels, and teen suicide attempts. The good news is, there is an exit ramp, and your host, best-selling author, and former U.S. Congressman Alan Steelman will guide you to your very own exit. Alan's mission is to help you learn about and adopt strategies and techniques to restore balance and equilibrium to your life. You'll learn from Alan and his guests simple and practical stress-relieving techniques, and you will be inspired by numerous interviews with other people just like you, who have moved from stressed out to charged up, and from misery to mastery. You are cordially invited to join us and learn to live your life in joy and on purpose. Take a deep breath. Let's begin exiting the ASAP lane with Alan.
Fort Hood Warriors and Downward Facing Dog. This may be the first time these words have appeared in the same sentence, except within America's largest active-duty armored U.S. military base. Today's show, I think you will find very interesting and fascinating, and most of all, informative, because it's going to destroy many of the stereotypes that present major barriers in the minds of many in taking up the practice of yoga and meditation. Many men, for example, think it's not macho enough, or they aren't as flexible as the women they see in the magazine pictures, and they might even be embarrassed. Many seniors think they're too old. Kids, teens, and college students are often too busy with their social media devices and apps, and African Americans and Latinos often think, well, no one like me does yoga. Well, if you fall into one of these categories, I think you will find many just like you actively using yoga and meditation to regulate the stress and anxiety in their lives here at America's largest active duty military base. My guest today is Dr. Beth Funk. Dr. Funk is on the front line in a number of ways in helping American military service members and their families cope with lives that are marked with uncertainty and subject to constant change. She grew up in an Army family and has been an Army wife and professional educator for 31 years. Her husband, Lieutenant General Paul Funk II, is the base commander here at Fort Hood and is currently on deployment in Iraq. And on top of that, her father, Lieutenant General John Yeosock, led the U.S. Army Ground Forces in the very successful campaign in Desert Storm in the early 1990s. And I might add that she is affectionately referred to sometimes as the First Lady of Fort Hood. You know, most of us have heard stories of those who grew up in Army families, and Beth, like many, attended 10 different schools from kindergarten through the 12th grade and graduated from Marymount International High School in Rome. She's a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin with a degree in elementary and special education. She holds a master's degree in education administration and a doctorate in educational leadership. She worked in public education for many years and also spent several years teaching psychology and professional development at Blair Junior College in Colorado Springs, and has served as an adjunct professor in the College of Education Graduate School at Kansas State University. Continuing her life's mission of service, she has taken on a new mission, and this is our topic for today. She owns a business, Life Moves Yoga, dedicated to serving the entire demographic profile at Fort Hood, including the enlistee, their families, and the large civilian employees population at the base. She and her instructors specialize in trauma-sensitive, therapeutic, and adaptive yoga. I think an extremely important point is that, as mentioned briefly before, the stability that the rest of us strive for in our entire lives is virtually unknown to the military family. You know, completely setting aside the stress of overseas deployments for the enlistee, the requirement to pick up and move without a lot of advance notice is a constant in the life of the military family. Building the coping skills and resilience in a population that ranges from young children to adults and seniors is a major challenge. But that is the Herculean task Beth and her team have undertaken. She is the recipient of a number of awards, including the Secretary of the Army's Public Service Award, the Department of the Army's Outstanding Civilian Service Medal, the Yellow Rose of Texas, the St. Joan of Arc Award, the Miley Pitcher Award, the Margaret C. Corbin Award, and the Dr. Mary E. Walker Award. Wow, Beth, welcome.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much.
A much decorated individual you are. And many thanks for taking the time to talk with us and enlighten us on the special range of needs in such a diverse population of military families. But you know, like so many, you've told me that in spite of all your accomplishments, that this changed your life in a very dramatic way. And it has to do with what I referenced just a moment ago, the special stress that few of us understand who've not lived the life in a military family. Could you elaborate a bit on what you were talking about?
Sure, I would be happy to, and thank you so much. It really is such a pleasure to have this time together with you today, Alan. I wish that I was one that could say I've been practicing yoga for decades. I wish I had started years ago, but I actually just started my path of yoga about 8-ish years ago, following a really bad back injury that at the time I was puzzled about why my back was injured, because I could not think of anything that I had done to cause the type of damage I had in my back at the time.
And you were a very fit triathlete and a lifelong pursuit of physical fitness.
That's right. I had always exercised, and I was involved in sports, and it was a big part of my life, staying physically active. And so when my back gave out on me, it changed my life dramatically. I was in a tremendous amount of pain and discomfort. There were many, many things that I was unable to do. I still had 3 young folks in the house. We're still raising our family, and it was a really discouraging time for me. At the time, my husband was deployed, and our family was extremely busy. I was in graduate school. I was working in administration in the public school system. I have 3 young teenagers in my house that I was virtually raising by myself, in my husband's absence. And so it was a tremendously stressful time. It was also a time during the war that we had a lot of casualties. We suffered a tremendous amount of loss in our unit. And so it was a really stressful time. At the time, I thought I was doing really well with it. I just kept plugging forward and dealing with everything that came our way. But it was shortly after Paul's return home from deployment that my back suddenly gave out. And I have come to learn, a number of years later, that this amount of stress that I was carrying around with me daily was really the culprit, and not any sort of accident that caused the back injury.
So it changed your life in that you discovered that yoga not only brought certain physical benefits, but it helped you deal with the stress that ultimately was the cause of your back injury.
Yeah, absolutely. So I went for a couple of years trying to figure out how to heal myself, and I tried all of the mainstream traditional ways. I was back and forth to the physician. I had physical therapy, chiropractic care, even had resorted to some injections in the spine to see if I could get some sort of relief. At that point in time, I was even standing up to eat my meals because sitting was so uncomfortable for me. And finally decided to give yoga a try. My daughter was interested in trying yoga for the fitness aspect of it, and I had read some different reports talking about how effective yoga was for dealing with pain, and particularly with regard to the back. And so decided to just, what did I have to lose? I'll give it a whirl. Committed myself to trying it for a few weeks, and I never looked back. I started it to help heal the discomfort in my back, but what I discovered was way, way more.
Like so many of us, the magic that helps us cope with life in the ASAP lane.
Yeah.
Okay, this gargantuan facility, Fort Hood, the largest military base in the world, I believe, Could you describe it a bit for our listeners?
Well, it's pretty big, and I always hesitate to zero in on particular numbers because this place is constantly changing. But we have been stationed here a number of times over the years. I believe the numbers are somewhere in about over 45,000 soldiers assigned to the installation. Thousands more civilians, and of course all of the families that go along with that. Many live on posts, but many live in the surrounding communities. And on top of that, we have a very large number of retirees and veterans in our community.
Okay. Talk a little bit about the life of the families back home. You know, the horrors of war and the life of the soldier on the front lines is somewhat understood by civilians because there's so much reporting on it, even though most civilians have never experienced that. Less understood is the stress of a wife back home and children, the constant uncertainty, never knowing where your next posting might be, if your spouse is posted overseas in a combat area, not knowing whether they will ever come home or not, or if they do, in what condition. Could you talk a little bit about that, the life of the family and the stresses and strains of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for sure, our life is in constant motion. That's the name of our studio, Life Moves Yoga. But our life is in constant motion. And like you mentioned, Alan, as human beings, we crave stability. And we don't have a ton of that in this particular lifestyle. As you mentioned, we're moving frequently. Dealing with the deployments on top of all this is an added component, because keep in mind, for many of our families, when it's time for the deployment, sometimes those families have just arrived to this new installation, so have yet to form important connections, within the community and within their Army family. And this has been going on for a long time. We've been dealing with these constant deployments, and so our families are in need of yoga and meditation, and that was one of my primary reasons for opening up this studio in this particular place. Many people are away from family members. Their closest relatives are hundreds or thousands of miles away for so many of them. As soon as they start to build connections with other military spouses or community members, they're off again to another location. So for so many reasons, adding this level of support can be really life-changing.
One thing too that's very different in most yoga studios, most cities, the customers of the studios are generally people who come for yoga and they go home. In your case, you've taken on this special mission to deal with the entire family unit, including the service member, and that ranges all the way from young children all the way to seniors who are here and retirees who are here. So this creates a whole different dynamic, I think, for the kind of yoga practice you have to offer in order to meet the needs. So could you talk a little bit about the age range and the different types of needs that they have?
Yes, absolutely. So it's been a mission of ours and a deep desire to truly serve our community. And we know that this means a wide variety of levels, from novice yogis that are just, thinking about coming into this experience, and those who have been practicing for a long time. Also, the wide range of ages. So we have offered programs for our young folks in the community. We offer chair yoga for our senior population that needs this yoga practice so much, but often find themselves accidentally entering into power vinyasa classes because they've heard that yoga is good for pain management or for settling the mind. And so we try to offer a wide variety of classes, everything from extra gentle and chair yoga all the way up to the heated and the power vinyasa style classes, because for many people it is the physical practice that initially brings them into the space, and then, like you described earlier, the magic happens and they discover that the practice is so much more than the physical asana.
Well, just on that point, I think that most large city in many large city yoga studios are seen by its customers as being another form of going to the gym
Right.
for the physical benefits. And undoubtedly, there are enormous physical benefits. I've enjoyed them. You've enjoyed them all. We all do. But it sounds like your mission here, while it is delivering a lot of physical benefit, has to be very focused on the mind and dealing with the stress dimension of life in a military family. Would I be correct in that?
Absolutely. And I think that for many of us, the physical practice is just the beginning, and that is what we hope for as people come into this space, is that yes, the physical benefits are undeniable, right? We're seeing this. It's exciting, and it's wonderful, and we need to be moving our bodies, but we need to be moving them mindfully, while at the same time breathing deeply and breathing on purpose, to live our most vibrant life. So our desire is for our students to have the entire experience of what yoga has to offer.
Yes. Well, as you know, there are certain stereotypes that have to be dealt with in persuading any new person to come to a yoga session. And many people feel that it's not for me. As I mentioned earlier, men think it's not macho enough. Seniors think they're too old. Kids are too busy with their two thumbs on their social media devices. And of course, many African Americans and Latinos think nobody like me does it. And yet I've heard you say that it is for not only everybody, but for every body, meaning
Yes.
two different words as well as the whole population. Could you expand a bit on that?
Yeah, and absolutely. We know that if you can breathe, you can practice yoga. And as much as I love yoga photographs and yoga pictures, I also understand that sometimes we're contributing to that false sense that yoga is only for people who can put the foot behind the head or contort themselves into all these pretzel-like shapes. And so I would say one of the most common things that I hear is the person who says, "Oh, I thought about trying yoga, but I'm just not flexible." And of course, I always respond, flexibility is not a requirement to practice yoga. All you need to do is be able to breathe and come in with a willingness, with an open mind. And that actually the flexibility is a beautiful byproduct of the practice, right? It's something that happens when you practice, but certainly not what's required for you to practice.
Well, that was certainly the case with me when I started this 7 years ago. I spent all these years going to gyms and out running and lifting weights and doing things that men do. And I was, quote, physically fit. And so I went for the first time in order to be able to touch my toes again. And over the course of probably the first year, I sort of discovered, quote, what I call the magic in this. So I do think that that's probably what you were describing. Could you, so on the demographic profile of your studio here, as you and I have talked, I've learned that unlike many yoga studios around the country, uh, which are populated by those who can afford to pay for it, and largely white female, that your population here is very diverse, representing the demographic of the base.
Yeah.
So men and seniors and kids and teens and African Americans and Latinos. Describe the demographic profile of your customer base here a bit.
Yeah, I would say just that, Alan, that, our yoga studio is inclusive and welcomes everybody from the community, and that's who we get in here in this space to practice.
Okay. One thing that obviously has been talked about a lot over the past probably 15 years has been the whole issue of PTSD and trauma. And a veteran that I spoke to not too long ago who came back from Iraq with PTSD and said he was a military suicide waiting to happen, another one, told me that the millennial service member is different from prior generations in many ways. They've grown up in the social media age. They've grown up with their digital devices, with video games, and that they come into the service being less physically fit than many prior generations have. And he actually said that social isolation can cause PTSD, can cause trauma, that you've been used to being networked with your friends on Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat and all your sites, your social media sites. You've had a cell phone so you could call your mom and dad or your friends. All of a sudden you're deployed to Afghanistan or Iraq or some other remote location into a dusty place with no contact, no cell phone, no way to talk to friends or family, and you can actually get traumatized by social isolation. Do you have cases like that here, or more of yours returning veterans who have wounds both mentally and physically that you're dealing with?
I think this is such a great point to bring up, because I think when we hear of PTS or post-traumatic stress, sometimes we think only of those who have served in war and that this is a consequence of that. But people have post-traumatic stress from a wide variety of things. And so many people can come in experiencing signs of post-traumatic stress that have never deployed, and some have deployed multiple times. So what we really try to focus in on here is this notion of post-traumatic growth. And so what can we do from this point to live our most vibrant life? And so very focused on using yoga and meditation for this post-traumatic growth.
Well, you make a good point about trauma can come in many forms, not only combat related or even related to the military, but verbal abuse, sexual assault. Do you, since you do have such a large base here and some that never get deployed overseas, do you have trauma cases that come in that were totally unrelated to being in a military family?
Most definitely. And I think my thought is that this would be true of yoga studios all over our country, and that's why being trained in sort of this adaptive, trauma-sensitive, therapeutic style of presentation and teaching and guiding for yoga is so powerful, because it isn't just the service member who may be suffering from post-traumatic stress. It's really our population at large. As you said, we're living in the ASAP lane, right? And so this is important work for everybody, for the entire population.
You know, I would just point out, since we're at the largest military base in the world, that to your point about the inability of so many to cope today with life in the digital age, or life in the anxious, stressed, addicted, and pressured lane, as I call it, that we lost more to opioid overdoses last year alone than the combined wars of Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq. Obesity rates are soaring, teen suicide rates are soaring. So the work that you're doing here to deal with our military families, I think is not only incredibly important, but I think the casualty rate from non-military related things certainly shows that not only our military but our total population, really need to start paying attention to the anxiety and stress in today. Now, I had a prior guest who wrote a book actually called Bent Not Broken, Anna Dow, where she is Canadian and her husband came back with PTSD. She was talking about secondary trauma, the impact on wives and children living with a returning PTSD survivor. Do you see cases like that here, secondary trauma as well, or are yours mostly dealing with the returning service member?
I would say that we see all of that, and so we have been really aware of this need to care for the caregiver, and this is this is something that's important to us, and one of the reasons why in our class designed for warriors, our free class that we offer on Wednesday nights for our service members and veterans, we include the spouses in that class as well, because our families serve together. So if a family member has post-traumatic stress, that takes a toll on the entire family.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much. I do want to say that I met Beth's father-in-law just before we started this episode, retired General Paul Funk Sr., the father of her husband. And Beth, like so many of us, in discovering the magic of this, wants to become a missionary and an evangelist, just like I have become and aspire to get even better at. So she's even persuaded her father-in-law, who I think is age 76 or thereabouts, and he practices yoga 3 times a week. And so he would meet certainly 2 profiles of those 5 demographics I talked about. He's a man with all the barriers that all of us have brought to this initially, and he's a senior, and yet he's practicing 3 times a week, and he talks about really the magic that he's discovering. Has he been a hard person to convince, or are you having to continue to work on him some?
I love that question because we talk about it in our family a lot. My mother and father-in-law are such beautiful, wonderful people, and I met my husband when I was 13, so they have been like a second set of parents to me for as long as I can remember. And I know that they came initially to the studio when I opened as a way of showing their support for our mission. And that's what I thought it was at first, and was really surprised when my father-in-law in particular, I kind of knew my mother-in-law would like it, but my father-in-law started coming even when my mother-in-law couldn't make it that day. And all of a sudden he was here, he was pulling up in the car by himself, and I thought, wow, I think he really must like this. And so now he's been practicing with us for a year and a half, and he said he has had an amazing experience with this yoga practice. And what I know for sure is that if it was not working for him, if he did not like it and was not seeing improvements or feeling improvements, he wouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, he may be a work in progress, but just from having the coffee with him, I can tell that you've made an awful lot of progress with him. Beth, I also want to mention, just in closing, and underline what a special place this is. And would you talk about this visit you're getting from Good Morning America, the Reader's Digest, coming up, that has named this one of the 10 nicest places in the United States of America?
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. It was incredibly exciting for us over the last couple of months. We were nominated.
And you've only been open a year, and already.
Yeah, so we had just been open just a little over a year when this happened, and we were nominated by a practitioner and a teacher at our studio, just a beautiful person, Judy, who is continuing she's out at the National Training Center now, teaching yoga out there and spreading the yoga love, on that side of the country. But put in a nomination for our studio as one of the nicest places in America. And of course, at the time, we were just so touched and honored that someone would consider us in that category. And that's as far as we thought that was going to go. They received, I think, close to 500, if I'm not mistaken, not applications, but nominations. And we were just blown away and shocked when we were contacted by the editors at Reader's Digest saying that we had been selected as one of the top 10 nicest places in America. We were so honored and thrilled, and the reason that we're so happy is not because of what it means for our little studio. We know that we are just this small little space in this community, and we know that there are places like us all over the country serving in the same capacity. But our hope is that when someone hears our story and sees what we're doing here, that they might think to themselves, wow, I wonder if yoga can help me. And if that happens and they seek yoga and they walk this path, their lives may be changed forever. And
Right.
so this is why it's so important to us and why we're so thrilled to have received this.
Yeah. Well, that is just so inspiring. And as you said earlier at the start, this changed your life in a very dramatic way, as it has so many. And we run into many, I know you do, where it not only changed, it saved their life.
Right.
So there really is truly something special in this to our listeners. And I hope that all of you listening, if you haven't already, will start to investigate this and at least give it a try. So, Beth, in closing, I want to thank you so much for agreeing to share all your incredible insights to the listener. I hope you've seen from some of these examples that people exactly like you are actively participating in yoga and meditation as a means of restoring balance and equilibrium to their lives amidst this global epidemic of stress and anxiety that we find ourselves in. There is good news. There is an exit ramp from this ASAP lane, and I hope that you have learned some valuable insight into how to apply it to your own life. And I only wish that I could show you a picture of Beth, because her necklace says simply breathe. And you said if you can breathe, you can do this. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you so much, Beth, and thanks to all of you for listening.